Smaller parties taking the IEC to court, double voting, online reports of vote rigging. These are just some of the issues that the Independent Electoral Commission had to deal with this past week following elections 2019. The IEC released the final results on Saturday, but how was the overall process? Well, to tell us more, we joined in studio by IEC Deputy Chief Electoral Officer Masego Sheburi. Good to see you.
Good morning.
How are you feeling?
We okay.
Did you have a good sleep at all? Have you slept?
We've had 40 weeks of sleep.
Good. I'm happy to hear that. So we now, I suppose, are at the point where we look over the election and we see how things went. And from the outset, it kind of looks like you had a lot of complaints this time. Were there a little bit more complaints than usual?
Certainly, there were more parties. The number of parties contesting increased threefold, from 29 parties in 2014 and from 16 parties in 2009. So it was a threefold increase.
Yeah.
Similarly, the number of contestants increased. We had 15,000 people contesting a maximum of 800 seats. So the negative voices were at some point likely to drown out and drown out the positive voices of those who are doing well in the elections.
Yeah. Voter irregularity, that was one of the biggest things, especially when it came to that indelible ink.
Yes.
Where are we with this?
Indelible ink is one in a basket of safety measures. For well-meaning voters, that's not even necessary to use indelible ink in the electoral process. If you consider that a person is registered and appears once on a voter's roll, and if they vote at their voting station, they are scratched off the voter's roll at that station and they have no opportunity to vote again at that station. Indelible ink, as I said, is one of many features. There's a voter's roll, there's party agents, there's inbuilt control system in our result system. But like with all other elections, we will take stock of the experiences, look at what happened with the indelible ink and see what are the improvements that we could occasion.
Have you spoken to your supplier as yet? Because we know that the cost of getting that indelible ink, you spent 2.7 million on those pens, and this seems to be the center of the controversy. Have you spoken to the service provider?
We have not yet spoken to the service provider, but we had given a sample to the CSIR to ask them to test them in a lab condition so that we can, when we speak to the supplier, we can speak on an informed basis to say, did the things meet the specification or they did not. But the preliminary indications from the CSIR are that the ink was in terms of the specifications. There may have been issues of bonding because of larger than usual particles in some, not all, in some of the samples that we provided to them.
Yeah. I mean, this obviously has upset the smaller parties quite a lot, and they say they want to take you to court over the voting irregularities. What's the update on this?
We have not received any papers, but we prefer that, I think it's a preferable route that people should go to court, vent and adduce factual evidence so that the court can make a determination. On our part, we are certain that there were no irregularities, and even if they occurred, those irregularities were not systemic and they could not have impacted on the outcome of an election. In that regard, we ask anyone who has evidence or proof of how the irregularities were facilitated to please share that with us so that we can improve in areas where we are found wanting.
Yeah, let's talk money, shall we? Because this is quite an interesting part of contesting an election. Now, we know that in order to contest an election, the national, you have to pay a deposit of 200,000 rand per party. Per province, it's an extra 45,000 rand, which goes directly to the IEC. Now, with a lot of these parties that didn't make it, and they didn't even get a single seat, they have lost, with the smaller parties, 16.7 million rand. Does that go to the IEC, non-refundable from these smaller parties? Is that your money now?
No, it's not.
Is it not your money?
No, of the 48 parties that contested, only 14 reached a threshold enough to get a seat. And because they got a seat, they will be refunded all their deposits. Those that did not reach the threshold, they forfeit the money. And because this is not a revenue generation scheme from the IEC, the money is forfeited to the national fiscus. The money doesn't come to us.
So the money doesn't go to the IEC.
The money doesn't
it is
come
forfeited.
to the IEC.
So
it is not a barrier to participation.
So it's quite an interesting thing. So if you get a seat, then that money comes back. But if you don't get a seat, you forfeit the money.
A party like Al Jama will have its deposit refunded totally because they got a seat. A party like the ATM will get their deposit returned because they got a seat.
But the party like the BLF?
The party like a BLF, like the ACM, ARCO, and many others will unfortunately forfeit that
They're out of
deposit.
pocket. We're talking, if the BLF were about 600, I mean, they were contesting each province, were they as
They
well?
were contesting a combination of provinces.
Combination of provinces
I know
and
Free
nationally.
State was not one of them. Yes.
Sure. So, I mean, that is a lot of money that's forfeited. But that, as you say, going in is the risk of competing in these elections.
That's correct.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. I know that it is an interesting thing, and a lot of people are asking about that. Let's talk to some of the voting stations. Now, obviously, you've had a chance to assess why they opened late. I remember seeing messages late in the afternoon saying that 5 stations hadn't even opened at all. What happened there?
In all instances where we opened stations late, it had nothing to do with shortcomings on our logistics. It was just the environment where you found communities that dug up trenches, basically sealing off access into certain areas, and we could not get in there until SABC and the local municipality assisted us to repair the roads to enable us to gain access. Of the 22,924 voting stations that we operated on election day, only one voting station in the Eastern Cape remained closed for the rest of the day. The rest we were able to open. Where we were challenged, we maintained the voting stations open for longer periods. In fact, in Umlazi, we had a number of stations closing late because around 7 and 8, we had challenges with electricity where electricity supply tripped in areas that serviced a number of voting stations. Having said that, I must indicate that on election day, as we always do, we get the Human Science Research Council to do a sample study of 300 random voting stations that are representative of the voting population. They interviewed 13,600 voters on this election, and 95% of those gave us a thumbs up. They thought the process was free, the process was fair. They also gave us thumbs up as it relates to access to voting stations, that on average a voter spent 15 minutes to access a voting station, and once they were there, they only spent on average about 16 minutes before they voted. So on a large scale, the voters were very happy with the electoral process. Of the 4% that were not happy, we want to zoom into those to see what it is that we can further occasion to improve their experience.
Make it easier. Double voting.
Yes.
That was again at the centre. We talk about the indelible ink. We talk about the double voting. I know there were a couple of arrests made, audit into this double voting. Talk to us about what's going on there.
I think first we need to dispel the idea that a person voting at the station at which they are not registered constitutes double voting. There is an area of our law that requires us to have serious discussion post the election period. The law was well-meaning in introducing a provision that enabled persons to vote in voting stations at which they were not registered. It was intended to facilitate the continued participation of people who found themselves outside of their voting station on election day. For example, truck drivers. On election day, they are outside of their area. If we did not introduce intervention, they will not be able to vote. So issues of double voting, where they existed, they are very insignificant. We also got the Statistician General to run a model for us to give political parties and the South African population some level of comfort to say, if it happens, was it on a widespread, was it orchestrated? He concluded, he took a sample of 1,020 voting stations, they ran their model, and he said in 13 voting stations, they could identify those areas, but even then, they were so insignificant that they could not have materially impacted the outcome of an election.
Do we not vote according to our ID number?
We vote according to ID number, that's correct.
So how do you double vote? I mean, yes, okay, I rub my ink off, but my ID has already showed that I voted. So, I mean, surely at the end of the day, those votes can't be counted.
The theory is that a person voted at their correct station. Somehow they were able to remove their indelible ink. I still have mine.
Yeah? Well, mine's just rubbing off
They
now.
proceeded to go to another station at which they are not registered, and applied to vote by Section 24A, which permits a person to ask to be included in the voters' roll of a station at which they are not registered.
Okay.
Yes.
And they were allowed to do that?
In some.
But I would think that automatically, I mean, when you scan somebody's ID, I would imagine that if you go somewhere else, doesn't matter where in the country, I mean, surely this should be a lesson to you and the simplest thing, that if you scan that again, automatically a message comes up and says, boom, sorry, you voted already, you can't do this.
Those are considerations for the future, but currently our zip machines do not have that technology. They are not connected, they are not online.
That worries me. I mean, that genuinely worries me, that you base your entire model on the fact that I have a black mark on my finger and not my ID. I mean, surely that would be the simplest way to go, is that as soon as my ID has been scanned, I am not allowed to vote again.
That's true, but for well-meaning people who vote at their voting station, you don't even need a mark.
With all due respect, unfortunately we live in a country where not everybody is well-meaning. We live in a world where not everybody is well-meaning, and you have to think for the criminal. You have to think for the people that are desperate to go out there and rig a system. I mean, every business is formed on the fact that somebody wants to break into the system and rework it. Now, surely you're going to change that with immediate effect. I personally can't believe that that's how it works anyway.
No, that is how it works, and for the future we'll put in consideration to see how we further evolve to respond to an evolving electoral system or the electoral landscape.
Yeah, I mean, we would already think we'd be there. I mean, we talk constantly about the fourth industrial revolution, and yet we're relying on ink to see that we are honest and don't go back and vote again. I mean, these things are surely not even up for discussion in this day and age. And this is, I would imagine, has got a lot of people worried in South Africa. We want to make sure that our electoral system is almost fault-proof. But this election has proved that you can rig the system, and very easily.
Except that we must still pass the test of materiality. But going forward, we assist with the challenge to improve. However, whatever system we put in place must respond to the edifice of our development. It cannot be a system that can work in the city of Johannesburg and can work in a village in Limpopo, the Eastern Cape, or areas of the Northern Cape.
Okay, we got to leave it there, but thank you for coming in. Thanks for talking to us. IEC Deputy Chief Electoral Officer Masego Sheburi talking to us about the elections and some of the issues that they faced, and going forward, how things will be done differently. The time, it's 8 o'clock.